everyone, this video is a little different from my other videos because it is based on a discussion that we've been having this month in my Facebook group, Creative Innovations in Painting. Every month we have different themes, and we've been discussing how to paint fruit this month. One of my goals has been to have the members make observations about photos I've been posting so that they could begin to quote-unquote see. So today the video will be mixed with various photos and techniques as we explore how to create realistic fruit. There may be times where you want to pause the video so that you can make observations before we move on to the next subject. I would also like to encourage you not to fast forward any part of this lesson. Really give yourself the time to sit and just watch this so that you can learn and make observations and begin to learn to see. So let's look at this design that I painted called Fruit Medley. This is one of the more realistic fruit projects that I have done. How was I able to make a two-dimensional object look three-dimensional? And how was I able to make it look like it was actually realistic fruit hanging? I believe that there are two important elements to create realism, whether it's fruit or flowers or still lifes or anything else. The first is to be able to identify the four forms within every object that is painted. Those are the sphere, the cylinder, the cone, and the cube. The other is to completely understand the medium that you are working with and to have the knowledge on how to use that medium to create realistic form. So let's move on and discuss these cherries. I showed a variety of cherry photos this month in the group so that you could make observations on lights and shadows and textures and colors. Cherries are a very shiny fruit, and therefore it can be difficult to discern where the main highlight is and what the secondary lights are, or what bounce back light is. While this is a lovely photo, I believe that it was taken with two light sources. What's really important when we are taking photos or using other photos to paint, we want to make sure that we have one main light source. Look carefully at these cherries. I absolutely love all the beautiful textures and the modeling going on, all the different red tones underneath. It's absolutely lovely. And I love the contrasting light green or yellow green next to it. But one of the things that makes this difficult is that we do have conflicting light sources. It's not consistent. The main light source appears to be in the upper left-hand quadrant of the cherries. But then we have another light source coming from the right-hand side also. I believe that the photographer had two artificial lights, and that's why there is not a consistent light source. Also, notice how you can't see the core dark. It's because the photo was taken so close. The light is now bouncing off of the white, and it's reflecting back up onto the cherries, which is eliminating a lot of our dark, which is needed to create form. We will continue using the cherry to discuss how to identify form within a design. As you can see, the overall shape of a cherry is a circle. And so that would mean that then the dimensional form would be a sphere. However, what you'll notice as you make observations is generally there's no perfect forms as you are making observations of realistic objects. So looking at the four forms, which is the cylinder, the cone, the sphere, and the cube, what form would you say the stem is? Basically, it is a cylinder. And those are the kind of observations that you need to make so that you know how to recreate what you're seeing as you're painting it. In this photo, I wanted to show you that while the overall form is a sphere, the top of the cherry is a combination of forms. And I'm showing you those forms off to the right-hand side. It's almost as if someone cut off the top of the sphere on the left cherry. Now look carefully at the highlights. Now look carefully at the highlights right underneath the stems. Those look a little bit like cylinders that were put together. But then as it rounds over, the top flattens out as if it's almost like a cube. The cherry in the back is at a different perspective, and I would approach this mostly as if it was a sphere. I wanted to show you this next photo because it's at eye level and it's taken with natural light. I really prefer to take my photos with natural light. Notice how all of the highlights are consistent in the upper right hand quadrant of the cherries. They also create more of a round shape. In the past, we've seen that there was all different kinds of shapes of highlights. And in the photos that I showed you during the month, it was the same way. Where it became confusing, this, having a single light source and having it be natural, you can see that the highlight forms a circle. And it's going to help create the overall form, which is a sphere of the cherries. Also, can you see the core dark in the opposite quadrant? In the other photo, we couldn't hardly even see it. Look how dark some of these cherries are. The cherries hanging from the jar are the only ones that have reflective light or bounce back light on the outer lower left side of the cherries. What I like about reflective light is it helps roll the eye back and separate berries a lot of times. But always notice that the reflective light is much cooler than the actual highlight on the berries. Blueberries are so much fun to paint, but they have their challenges too. What form are they? For the most part, they are also spheres. But what makes them difficult to paint? Notice that these blueberries have a light blue coating on them, which goes all around the berries. This coating also absorbs light, and therefore your highlights and your shades are distorted. Can you see any core darks on here? It's very difficult to see highlights or darks because of the way that the coating is on the fruit. The blueberries in this picture were rinsed recently. Notice how shiny they are. In the previous photo, the berries look very dull. Why do they look shiny compared to the other berries? And it's because you're seeing more extreme highlights and extreme shades. By looking at these berries, it is easy to see where you would place the highlights and shades as you paint them. But now, how would you paint that blossom end? The blossom ends basically are star-shaped concave areas on the fruit. If you look carefully, you can see that the light and darks are reversed, and that's how you make them look like they are concave. On the berry, the highlight is in the upper right-hand quadrant, and the dark is on the left. Notice in the concave blossom end areas that the darks are on the right, and the highlights are on the left. As we move on, I want to show you this design that I painted because it has a variety of colors in it. Blueberries are not always blue. And the ones that are more maroon and are lighter colors, those are unripened. So now let's make some observations about this. Do you notice how all of the highlights are in the upper right-hand quadrant and the core dark is in the left? And while those blossom ends are very small, I did paint them reversing the lights and darks so that they would appear to be concave. What really made those challenging was the actual size because each berry was a ½ an inch or smaller. So the blossom end was like a 1/16 of an inch. And so it's very difficult to paint in small areas like that. Much like blueberries, plums are more of a sphere shape and also have a coating on them which can absorb rather than reflect lights. Notice how the light is brightest where the coating was worn away. You can hardly see any dark on this at all because of this blue coating. So how can you create form with fruit that has this mold coating on it? Well, one way is to rinse them off before you take the photo or before you begin to paint them. It is amazing how much shinier they are once they are cleaned up. And you can see the highlights and the core darks and beautiful bounce back lights. It's just much easier to paint without that coating on them. I loved this photo because of the different perspectives that we see in the plums. Look at the plum on the right-hand side. You can see that it's round. But would you paint this as a sphere? And this is where you need to be able to see the different forms within what you're painting. Because even though overall the shape is round and it is a sphere, because of the perspective, you are also going to approach the center around the stem like multiple cylinders that are going around in a circle, because they need to roll back. The last thing I want you to notice is the range of tones in these plums. Can you see in the front plum how there's a very light red, almost an orange red at the very top, and then it moves into red violets. The plum that's to the left goes from red violet, maybe a little bit of red, into violets. And the very back, darkest plum is mostly violets, almost to black. What I love about this is then as artists, we can then record what we see and create that depth just by changing the different tones. Now let's move on and discuss berries that have shapes within them. I love that these are Boysenberries, and I love the different tones in them. And again, it shows that some are ripened and others are extremely unripe. What shape are these? Some are cylinders, some are cones, and sometimes they even look like spheres. But what makes these challenging to paint? I think what really makes them challenging to paint is that they have smaller shapes within them. It's like they have multiple spheres that are built up to create the overall shape. So these berries, you have shapes within a shape, which makes it very challenging. Just like the boysenberries, raspberries have a variety of shapes and are made up with multiple small spheres. It would be the same for blackberries also. What I like here is how they have the little teeny hairs coming off of it, and you see so much texture. But to try to paint those would be next to impossible. In this design that I created, I used artist license to paint each individual berry. The spheres that I painted within the berries, I approached almost as if they were water drops. And overall, I think that's what makes them look so juicy. One thing I want you to notice is that the overall shape of each berry has a highlight area and a core dark. But then I also had to create form within each individual sphere and then change the values as I went along. This made it a very advanced piece. You also have to be able to control value and how you apply it in a very small area. Strawberries are so much fun to paint, but can be challenging because of the texture. Overall, what shape are these? Basically, it is a cone shape. Because as you can see, it's just kind of like a triangle that has some curves to it. And so I would approach it very similar to how I would approach creating a cone shape. I would approach this in the beginning and create basic form using the same method as I would painting a cone. But then there's the texture, and there's all those little concave areas, and there's all those little seeds. This really makes painting strawberries very difficult. In this design, I painted strawberries along with some of their blossoms, and you can see that I eliminated a lot of seeds. It helps to simplify what you're seeing when you're painting it. And while I approached this and added shades and highlights like I would a cone when I first began, I then created the little individual seeds and added shading and highlighting around them to build up the overall form of the berry, but yet to make the seeds look like they were concave and part of the berry. The last fruit I want to talk about are nectarines. They vary a lot from peaches because they have a shiny skin, and I feel as though nectarines are much easier to paint than peaches because peaches have like that fuzz on them. And again, not only do you have to create form, but you have to create texture then. With nectarines, You do have to record some of the patterns that you see with the colorization, but you're not having to make them look fuzzy. So what overall shape are these? For the most part, they are a sphere. If you look at the lower right-hand nectarine, it has a little bit of an indent. We jokingly say that's the butt section of a nectarine. But the back part, what shape would that be? Well, that is more like a cylinder, and I'm going to be showing you that in some step-by-steps. But first I wanted to go on and talk about more ways that you can take photographs to be in your benefit rather than to hinder what you're painting. Notice this nectarine. Can you see that the highlight is on the red portion and then the dark area is the yellow portion of the fruit? If I would have been taking this to paint, I would have flipped it around so that the yellow was in the light area. Because you always have to think when you are taking the photos, how are you going to approach painting this? And what will make it easier for you to paint? Obviously, red is darker than yellow, so it would be much easier to leave the yellow section of the nectarine in the lightest area of the fruit, and then put the red in the darker section. This is a nectarine design that I did with some blueberries, and I've now updated it and made it more of a farmhouse design. And I wanted to discuss all the steps with you on how I approach this with my painting. So now I want to discuss how I use these value diagrams. I try very hard to put value diagrams and or step photos in all of the pattern packets that I put together. In this one, this is showing you exactly where to place the highlights. So if I put a line around this, you can see that this is a circle because this is a sphere. In the back area, this is really treated more like a cylinder, and because it's dark, it really doesn't have a highlight. I'm just going to use the mid-tone color to lighten it. And this is the shade diagram. So what I'm showing you is the first shade's got to come all the way up here. So what we do is we have shade, then we have a little bit of mid-tone, and then we have highlight. Then the second shade will round it out and come over here. So in order to create form of a sphere, the first shade will have our core dark over opposite of our upper right-hand light source, and then it will come all the way around to round it back. We have lots of shades in here, but notice how in the center the mid-tone will be showing through, and then it will appear to be like a highlight. I also show you how to add the shades to the berries and the highlights also in the diagrams. So these are actually some step-by-step boards that I wanted to show you, because whether you are painting with the acrylic layering technique, which this was, and I used bottled acrylics, or whether or not you're blending, doing like a wet into wet blending, and for that you would use a gouache or a mid-bodied acrylic paint, you're going to have to make sure that you're creating form. What varies is the type of techniques you use. I would be in here, so in here I use the acrylic layering technique, and so I either dry brushed or floated the color, and so here's my first shade color coming all the way around here. Then I bring around the outside edge of a very light highlight in here, and in between there's just a little bit of mid-tone color. It's very important that you don't have your highlights touch a shade color. And I did the same with the blueberries. What throws a lot of students off is when we're doing multiple berries like this, they tend to run together because it's all one value. I paint in stages, so I do all the first shades and highlights first, and that's why this will happen. Other artists will approach it differently. This is how I learned how to paint. And so you can see with this next layer, this is my second step, and so we've got some more values in here. It's rounding a little bit more. It takes 5 values to create form. We're not quite there yet. We need one more here. When you are doing a blending technique, you can black in your 5 values right away and blend them out. But when you're doing the layering technique, you really have to work with only 3 values at a time. But you can also see now that there's a little bit more separation between the berries because we've added some different values and I'm starting to define them. So now we have true form. We have a really nice bright highlight in the upper right hand corner. You can see how this is a true sphere right here, the way I painted it. And back over here, this is really a cylinder. Yes, it curves a little bit, but it really is a cylinder. And you can also now see that the form of the berries has come along and it's very dimensional because we have our 5 values in there. One thing I wanted to point out too is one mistake I always see painters do is when they are painting berries, and like this one over here is underneath, they'll move the highlight over here just so it will have a highlight. Well, the truth of the matter is it's really not going to have much highlight because this berry is blocking it. So simply having a mid-tone and then the darks is going to create form, but it also is going to create the illusion that it's behind this other berry. Those are the little things that you have to remember. The same with this berry. The highlight's hidden, so we have mid-tone here, and then our different shade colors. And that's what creates all this dimension going on within this design. Then the last thing I do is I create interest. I add accents and reflective lights and all those really pretty things. Now this was a step board and so my highlights are not brought up all the way on here, but what I wanted to do is show you how I came in and I brought in the red at the end. One of the reasons why I added the red, not only do you see that color naturally in nectarines, but in this one it's beginning, we're using brown, so it's starting to look a little bit like it's unripened. By adding the red, it brings it back to life again. Now, the techniques that I used to do this would have been either dry brushing or glazing. And then with the little bit of speckles that I would put on here, I could stipple a little bit or just use the tip of my liner brush. Every design I might approach a little bit differently. I don't know if you can see, but there's some really beautiful blue accents right here. And that's just repeating a little bit of the coolness over here, but it's also going to lift the leaf off of this warm nectarine. So by using contrasting temperatures in colors, it creates separation. And that's what I really wanted to do here, is to make it look like this was on top. And so this is not done. Again, it was just a step board, and we need some cast shadows and a few other things. But I wanted to show you basically the approach that I would use. I have given you multiple videos on my YouTube channel that discuss technique. That's why I'm not showing you the techniques here, because I want you to go back and review those techniques. They really get into detail. Now I want to go on and talk just a little bit about technique. I have stressed how important it is to learn to be able to see the forms in what you're trying to paint realistically. Whether you're painting with acrylics, oils, colored pencils, as long as you know how to control that medium and you understand how to create form, you're going to be able to create anything realistically. I prefer to use acrylics. So most of the time I use bottled acrylics and I use the acrylic layering technique. Therefore I use floating a lot. In my video, The Basics of Floating, I go into detail how to side load your brush, how to control how much paint is in your brush. And those are the type of skills you need to develop in order to make reflective lights or walked out floats. You need to be able to vary the size of the application that you're painting in order to place the values in the proper place to create form. This is a design that I painted called Plantation Plums. And in my video called Advanced Floating Techniques, I discuss how to do circular floats and how to walk out a float and basically It shows you all the techniques that you need to know how to create realism using the acrylic layering technique. But as I said, there is more than one way to approach painting. And while I like to use floating and the acrylic layering technique, I also like to do dry brushing and blending. In this video, I discuss how to do wet blending. And when you wet blend, you can actually put in 5 values at a time, which actually it saves you a lot of time when you're creating realism. What's important is that when you are using the wet blending technique is that you use a very delicate touch and you simply blend it out, creating your form. My last YouTube video that I wanted to point out is the one that I do have on dry brushing and creating form. This really helps a lot of acrylic painters who have a hard time walking out floats and making their application of paint very smooth and even. So in this video, I show you not only how to dry brush, but then how to create form using that technique. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you've really enjoyed learning about how to create realistic fruit. I hope you'll give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so. Most of the paintings I have showed you here today are more advanced. So if you're a beginner painter, do not get frustrated. Take on projects that you can accomplish easily. But try using and practicing the dry brushing techniques and all of the techniques that I have in my YouTube videos. Learning to create form, even if you simply block in a circle and create a sphere, that will help you accomplish creating realistic fruit so much easier. So next time, may painting always bring you joy.